Welcome back to the Black Swan Capitalist channel. My name is Vandel. Versan is here with us as usual. And today we have a very special guest joining us for the first time, Gareth Soloway. So I'm going to give a quick intro on Gareth. Gareth Soloway is a 24-year technical trader and macro analyst and has been chief market strategist of the InTheMoneyStock.com, which provides stock day trading and swing trading services since 2007. He's also the president of VerifiedInvesting.com, where you can find crypto swing trading services as well as course education. This is amazing. Thank you, Gareth, for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
You've made some interesting predictions in the past, and you've been right on those predictions. So you kind of have a pretty good track record. And that's something we wanted to bring up, your outlook on the stock and crypto market currently.
Yeah, so I mean, the outlook for the crypto market in particular, and we can touch base on kind of what Bitcoin's been doing here. In fact, let me show my screen so people can kind of get immersed within this. But basically, what we've been seeing here is that, to me, this is a bear market rally in Bitcoin. And the reason it's a bear market rally is, number one, while it's a big gain for Bitcoin of 100% off of the lows from the 15 and change level to the 30 and change level, it's not unfamiliar to past cycles on Bitcoin. Bitcoin has had plenty of 100% bounces in that period. What makes me feel like, again, it's still a bear market is that you're still struggling and you're kind of having this effect where positive news is being met with selling. And what I mean by that is, if we look here, this was the BlackRock ETF spot news, and we had this beautiful move up, slammed into this major level here, which again, by the way, this major level goes all the way back to the bull market area here in 2021. But if we look at that whole gain kind of was wiped away. And then in between, we had the Ripple news with the judge, right? And that news, we saw the price action get wiped out the next day. Here was Grayscale right here, price action wiped out the next day. So again, in general, to me, it's a bear market rally. I think the Fed sucking liquidity out is making it very, very tough on crypto right now. And generally, that's going to bleed into other risk assets like stocks at some point, although there's still a ton of liquidity to help the stock market out. But overall, I would say that I'm in the camp that Bitcoin, again, is one of my favorite long-term assets, along with a few other cryptocurrencies. But I think that in the near term, people have to be ready for further downside. And one thing I'll just point out is that Bitcoin has not lost percentage-wise as much as it has in previous cycle bear markets. And that's interesting because in those previous cycle bear markets, the Federal Reserve had been lowering rates or still stimulating with quantitative easing. In this situation, you don't have that. In theory, you should do a bigger drop. Now, you do have institutional involvement here, so that could kind of cushion it a little bit. But again, I would just say buy pullbacks, DCA in. Don't be thinking about, hey, this is the bottom, let me go all in.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So in other words, you are predicting that we could go slightly lower.
Yeah, I do think so. And I think it's interesting because with Bitcoin, for me at least, it's not like I think Bitcoin doesn't really have the negativity out there. Like, what's going to happen to Bitcoin? I personally don't think anything negative will. It's more that the surrounding area, right? We know about frauds that have occurred in the past. Could there be another black swan event like that occurring or at some point in the crypto markets that freaks people out? Or does the stock market eventually roll over, and do we see a recession hit the US that's so bad that the NASDAQ drops 30, 40, 50%, and that could just by default take Bitcoin down? So I think those are the negatives for Bitcoin. And what's great about it is that there's nothing specific to Bitcoin. It's just kind of everything around it could make people scared enough to dump it. But again, for me, it's about a matter of saying, okay, if it gets to 20, pick up a little bit. If it gets to 15.5, pick up a little bit more and kind of dollar cost average in for the longer term.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, Gareth. And I had a question in relation to that. So we could see the bear market continue and we could go lower. There's a high probability of that. Mm-hmm. And what would be your price prediction? I know I'm asking about the price. We'll get into the other stuff too. But what would be your price prediction as we end up going higher after we bottom? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Target
absolutely.
market.
So I mean, my worst case scenario on the downside is like 9 to 10,000 on Bitcoin, which obviously we hopefully won't see. But again, if we did see some sort of huge de-risking event out there, then that would probably be the low end. What's fascinating about that, and I'll get to the high end real quick here, is if we look at this longer term trend line going back to the pre-bull market of 2017 and you connect it through the bear market of 2019 and then the COVID low, it gives us this amazing trend line right here. And one of the things I love to show here in terms of charting, and let me just get rid of these other trend lines so it stays super, super clear. But if we just go to our tool that allows us to do a parallel line and we draw that parallel line from that base again and we extend it up, look at what you get here. This is one of the coolest things ever, is that look at the low of 2021 right here and the highs that we just hit, perfectly parallel to that lower trend line right there. And so what that does is it makes me very aware that at some point we could flush down there in the kind of worst case scenario. Now, on the upside, just using charts and trend lines, I would do the same kind of thing. And what I would do here is potentially take a trend line from the 2017 high, connect it through these two highs. And if we do that and we kind of bring this in so we can extend it out, we can see that high, and again, depending on where we are at that point, you're probably looking at 90 to 100,000 as the high for the next bull market. That would make the most sense to me in terms of a chart. Where would, for instance, the question would be, if bull markets come back, which they will, where do we have the most resistance? And the answer would be here at the 2000, at this trend line kind of resistance level.
So between 90, 100,000, something in that area, basically.
Exactly. And it makes a lot of sense with 100K because, even numbers are they're almost like magnets. Price gets drawn to these even numbers. And so once you get in the 90s, you're probably going to at least touch 100,000 there. And then the big question is, do we just get a small pullback and another breakout, or does it stall out for the next bear market?
Right.
So real quick, do you believe that this next bull run we're going to see will be pretty much within that 4-year cycle that we've been seeing through previous bull runs? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the most amazing thing, is that so far 4-year cycles is all Bitcoin has known, right? So, but again, you're only going back, 14 years, give or take. And so the question I would have for people that are very entrenched, and there's this, I would say almost everyone is entrenched in this 4-year cycle, is to say, okay, that was a 4-year cycle while the Federal Reserve was always kind of lowering rates for the most part and printing. Does a 4-year cycle still hold up even in a tightening phase? And again, I don't know the answer to that, but I will say this, is that if it does, it really tells us a lot about Bitcoin in that it can withstand a tightening phase, and it still sticks to the 4-year cycles. But I am personally open to the possibility that it doesn't abide by the exact 4-year cycle because of the Fed tightening liquidity like it is.
Makes sense. Do you see the market performance doing well around the election time? I think people have a lot of concern about the disconnect between the economy, what the economy is telling us, and the technical analysis as well. Because we're getting two messages here.
No, you're right. There is, right? I mean, you have a period of the or a group of the population, a large chunk of the population that already feels like they're in a recession, right? And then you have another group that has been investing in stocks, for instance, that is like, wow, this is great. All I've seen is since October of 2022, the stock market's gone up and our 401ks and our IRAs are all up. And in fact, if you look at consumer confidence and you divide it up in between, like, the wealthy versus the middle to lower income, the lower income, you could see their consumer confidence is dropping like a rock, while the other side is having like a party. And so there's no doubt that this is continuing to happen, and it's growing, this divergence between the rich and the poor, essentially. And I do think that is a problem that our society has to deal with. Otherwise, it's going to blow up in everyone's face, right? I mean, you're going to see more and more discord out there, and things just kind of getting out of hand more and more. And we already see that a little in the political system and so forth, but it probably gets worse and worse as you see this divergence continue. So I think that's important to recognize. And then also just looking back at kind of, where we could be next election, I think a lot of that could have to do with how much information we get from the SEC ahead of that, right? If all of a sudden we have strict rules to follow, what is an altcoin? Is it a security? Is it not? What are the rules for everything? Then I don't think the elections play that much role. However, if we're still dealing with this, if the Ripple appeal is still going on, then I do think politically it becomes a very big deal, depending on who gets in the White House and then who could potentially, promote someone to the next SEC head position.
Yeah, I see your point.
Makes sense. That's a very good answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Gareth.
Mhm.
Now, this actually ties back to the Federal Reserve in some sense. I know you made a comment on the Federal Reserve in the past, and I think Versan wanted to ask you something about that.
I was going to talk to you about that off camera. This goes back to the Federal Reserve. You've seen what's happening with the currency. Purchasing power is completely lost. We just talked about the divide. The wealth gap is widening. So what I was going to ask is, previously in an older video on Kitco, you made a statement about there's going to be a point where the Federal Reserve would not be able to really, the crisis would be bigger than the Federal Reserve can handle.
Yeah.
And the people will demand that the Federal Reserve is out of the equation in a sense. So I was going to discuss that off camera, but since you brought it up,
Yeah.
Now I guess we can talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think that that is the ultimate outcome here. And again, you see it in other countries. I mean, a lot of other countries, it's much more of a dictatorship. So the people get put down very violently, and hopefully it doesn't get to like that in the US. But at some point when we have the deficit now 32, 33 trillion, the debt payments, again, I think there's even in terms of refinancing the U.S. debt, I think in the next couple of years, there's $7.3 trillion that has to be refinanced. And that's going to be at interest rates of 5%, give or take. I mean, this is massive money now. Even at this point, we're spending as much on interest as we do on our military, which is, by the way, our military gets more money than like the next 5-10 countries combined. So, I mean, we're talking huge wastes in essentially dollars that could be going to help society that could be going to solve many other problems just being thrown away because of our deficit being this high. And at some point, the only way out, unfortunately, is to print more money, right?
Mhm.
Which again is an unsustainable thing. Eventually, the population says, listen, here I am watching my dollars become worthless while the government is just doing this. And we didn't, as a society, vote for this, right? I mean, this isn't what we're voting for, is to have this happen. And I do think at a point it becomes unsustainable and the government will have to say, okay, we need a scapegoat here. And unfortunately, the Fed, or fortunately, depending on your position on the Fed, will be that scapegoat. And from the ashes, you will have a new financial system that's born with strict rules that kind of cap the amount of spending to probably the amount of revenue that the government gets in, stuff like that. And I think that's the inevitable outcome. Now, again, is that 5 years away, 10 years away, 15? It's hard to know, but I do think that is the end game here. And ultimately, this is this thing. It's going to be horrendous for everyone to go through. But what rises from that, especially with crypto in the picture and the ability to kind of keep things in check, that is going to be a huge long-term, next 50, 100-year benefit for the United States.
Now, as we discuss this new monetary system that is emerging, and we can see that the foundation and the groundwork is all being put into place right now for when a crisis like this, I think, reaches a critical point, they can introduce this. So there's two things, Ripple and Stellar, the Stellar Foundation. If you could cover the charts of XRP and XLM very briefly. Then just to add on another question, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
You see these technologies later on down the road, once regulated, decoupling from Bitcoin and traditional financial markets?
Interesting. So first off, looking at the charts, it's actually a fascinating chart on Ripple, because what we saw for the longest period of time while we were waiting for the judge's decision is this long consolidation pattern. And then the big pop that took us essentially to $1 before it's given it all back up. But as an investor, and listen, I'm more of a swing trader, so I'm not a long-term investor on this, but this chart is really good here. Like, as long as you can hold this trend line, this is a major support level on Ripple, and essentially you're getting it back at the exact price. Like, if I put in right at the low of this big green bar and I draw a line across, I mean, you have price exactly at it where it was prior to that news. And I always say to people, whether it's earnings on a stock, let's say a stock pops on earnings, and then it comes back in just because of market selling, you're getting an opportunity to own that stock, knowing those earnings were good at the price prior to those earnings being released. And kind of in the same situation, and this is assuming that the appeal gets rejected from the SEC, but at least you kind of know the leaning of the judge. So if there's a risk, it was riskier here because it could have gone either way. At least you have the judge's initial decision on the positive side, and you're getting at that same level. Now, again, does it guarantee a win? No, there's no guarantees in life. We know that. But as a technician, this now becomes a very significant support level on XRP at this point in time. So that'll be interesting to watch. Just one other little thing that I'm seeing here too is it almost looks like there's a secondary trend line right down here as well that kind of you can connect these lows and so forth, and it comes in that same area. So that would just be, you know, in general, the chart wise, XRP looks really good here. And then let's take a look at XLM. Let's see what we got there. So XLM, again, this isn't one I'm as familiar with, but nonetheless, I like the fact that it stayed relatively strong. Like you look at Cardano, you look at some of these other ones, they're making new multi-year lows, while XLM has actually held up relatively well. You got the big pop here, and it's actually holding this area of support here really well. So short term, you want to see that hold, which is around 11.25 cents. As long as that holds, I think that this is a buy, you know, for a move back up. If this breaks, that becomes a little problematic. You'll have some support around 9.5 cents. And then back to these lows. But overall, again, performance-wise, this actually looks reasonable considering how most altcoins have performed in this market.
Agreed.
Yeah, interesting. Now I have a comment on that. So I know you're looking at the technical analysis and you're showing us the chart, but there's something that I want to share with you and get your perspective on. So cryptocurrencies, digital assets is a completely different beast from the traditional stock market. So I still think we're in the early stages and the market hasn't fully matured, even though Bitcoin's been around for like 14 years. Because now we're starting to see certain assets have utility. And now the utility is really starting to kick in.
Yeah.
But the price is not, the value is not being reflected in the price of some of these digital assets at the moment. So what I'm thinking is, since this is such a new beast of its own, that once the market matures and the utility really kicks in and mainstream adoption takes place for specific assets for certain different sectors, for example, trade finance, cross-border payments, Hedera Hashgraph or HBAR for, for dApps and development on the blockchain. I feel like trillions and trillions of dollars are going to flow into these markets. What's your take on that? Do you see that happening kind of like in the early days of the .com bubble?
Yeah, so I definitely do, and I think you mentioned before too, or we talking about potentially decoupling from the stock market, and I think that will eventually happen as well. I think again, for me, Bitcoin, if you look at Bitcoin, it's kind of the future of digital gold. You know, I don't see people making transactions with Bitcoin, but I do think it's a store of value to maintain against a printing dollar presses, you know, by the Federal Reserve, kind of like what we talked before with. But I do think that you're in the early stages here. The question that I have is, you know, how do you value these things? Because again, you know, number one, we don't have any sort of regulation to go by from the SEC. Like when you value a stock, it's like, okay, well, how much money do they make? You know, based on that, what's a normal multiple? But with this type, we don't really have those metrics. And that, therefore, what that does is it makes it very hard to figure out what the true value should be. Now, for investors, that gives you a good opportunity, right? If things get way out of whack because people don't know how to value them, you can be someone that picks it up. And then when it does get valued, maybe the value is 10x of what it is currently. But on the other side of the coin too is I do wonder which projects will survive versus which won't. We know there's thousands of coins out there. And I do know that in the bull market of 2017, some of the leading coins are no longer the leaders now. And so it's a very tricky thing, right? You know, we don't have a good valuation metrics for how to value some of these coins. And at the same time, there's so many coins out there. A lot of them are junk too, that it just makes it very tricky. So it does create a scenario where you're very early on in this, like the .com, right? You mentioned the .com, and the .com bubble. Think about how many companies went out of business because they were just crappy, right? So that's going to happen with crypto as well. And the strong will survive and thrive. It's just, as an investor, you have to be a little bit careful with putting money to work and make sure that you're looking for the best of breed out there.
Yeah, definitely. And make a point real quick. So this is interesting, but on the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. So if you look at their history, okay, they are known to go after technologies and companies that are really innovative, disrupting different sectors. Okay, they went after Google, they went after Amazon at some point. They went off after Uber. The list goes on.
Yep.
Within the blockchain sector, the first one they chose to go after and delay it for over 2 years was Ripple. So considering all the utility that Ripple and XRP has, speed, efficiency, cost effectiveness, and energy friendly. Besides all that, they were also selected by the SEC to kind of slow down the adoption. That's what we believe, based on all the research. So it's a bit speculative, but it's just another indicator that there's something big with their technology, and they're clearly going to disrupt the banking or financial sector. And the SEC said, okay, we gotta, kind of slow this down. So they went after Ripple.
Yeah. No,
That's
you're right.
what-
You're right. In general, the government does go after these, or the SEC does go after these type of things, these new technologies. And I think part of it too is when the new technology comes out, people aren't really sure what the heck it is, right? And you're just kind of finding out, and then you get these bad actors, FTX, et cetera, that create this kind of, perception. And I think that's something that crypto has to deal with right now, is trying to establish like trust, right? And again, it reminds me of like the stock market even before 1920, right? Even, we're talking like late 1800s when the Dow Jones just was kind of in existence. It's very early on, and there's a lot of upside. Whatever survives is probably going to be up insane amounts over the next 20, 30, 50 years. But again, it's kind of getting through these growing pains right now that we're in right now. And it is tricky on investors. I mean, you have these bear markets that are just brutal.
Yeah. Well, what's your price prediction for XRP? I know you said the chart looks really nice. We spoke to a friend of ours who's a technical analyst, trader. You probably know him, Francis Hunt. So he runs the market sniper, okay? And his higher price prediction in the short term was $16 for XRP. And he was explaining all the technicals behind it, the fundamentals, how it did not hit its previous, in the previous bull run, it didn't surpass its all-time high. So it's been suppressed historically, if you look at the data and the charts.
Yep,
so
absolutely.
he's basically explaining that there's this huge pressure building up, ready to explode like a slingshot. And that was his take on it. But he was thinking $16.
Yeah.
It's, what do you think?
I would leave. I mean, these predictions, to be honest, I don't know. So one of the tricky things for me is that, I know a fair amount about Bitcoin, but I don't know a lot about individual projects. So it's hard for me to really extrapolate. But I would say this is that if it does become the norm for the financial system, then the upside is huge, right? So that's the big question. And the negative, right? There's always a positive, and then there's a negative, is that, I would say, how do these financial institutions that are so reliant on the status quo, what do they try to do to disrupt and derail this? Because again, you'd assume that they're not super thrilled with it at this point, unless they can somehow incorporate it into their system and use it to their advantage. So again, I'll leave the price predictions to him, and 16 sounds great. If you're in right now, that would be a gift.
The dots are always laid out in front of us in plain sight. Bank of International Settlements reclassifying gold to a tier 1 asset class. Then you look at the World Gold Council's 24/7 Gold Initiative, aimed for creating a stable coin for the digital transmission of gold. And then if you look at the World Bank, their documents, and I'm going to send these to you after we're done here.
Perfect.
Their document says that XRP and XLM are likely to be suitable candidates for stable coin classification. I see an intersection between precious metals and blockchain technology.
Yeah. No, I think you're onto something there, and that's some great information for sure. So yeah, man, I think that again, we're at this point where there is going to be some amazing stuff that comes in the next 5 years or so. And it's I think we're on this precipice where we're kind of behind a locked door, where we don't know, again, like the SEC issues and so forth. Once crypto breaks through this, that's going to be the glory. Like, that's going to be the sweet spot where these projects become mainstream, and potentially the ones that survive will do very, very well.
Well, I wanted to ask you real quick before we wrap this up, Gareth, and I agree with you on that. It's just a matter of time. I wanted to get your thoughts on, okay, so this is how I look at Bitcoin. It was created, it came out in 2008 or 2009, right after the housing crisis. Okay. it's gained adoption over time. It's still, well, basically, it's going to increase in price over time, we believe. But my concern is this, okay? And I'd like your feedback on this, and your perspective. So Bitcoin, it seems to me that Bitcoin is, in a sense, a direct threat to the central banks and the banking system, okay? Because it allows people to transact pretty much, if they choose to, under the radar to some degree, right? And it's almost like a competitor to the central bank and what they're trying to accomplish, which is a central bank digital currency. That's their goal ultimately, you know. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but that's what they want to do. You know, I was a banker for 4.5 years. So I mean, banks, they just want control. Okay. It's all about control, data tracking. They just want to have as much information as they can on people. And this goes beyond just the regional banks. This is the central banks we're talking about, the ones who control money, they control the world. And Bitcoin to me is a direct competitor to them. So I'm thinking, how could they actually let this flourish in the great future is what I'm saying. I see a huge risk there. For making money on the volatility as a trader, I'm 100% an advocate for that, you know. But long term, it's like a very gray area. And I feel there's too many indicators that say, hey, this is controlled by mining pools. The energy usage is so extreme, and now they're trying to push this green agenda. So you see where this is going, okay? What do you think? I mean, do you think it's going to continue to rise forever, you know, or will they shut down at some point? Because I think they will.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to know. And again, I think any investor in anything, you have to be well diversified because there's always a risk, right? We know that, heck, there were stocks back in 2003, WorldCom and Enron, right? You thought, at least many people thought they were the most stable companies in the world, and they turned out to be frauds and shut down. So I think investing, you have to be really aware of diversification to be safe with your money. And then the other thing too is, I mean, for me at least, I view Bitcoin as more of a digital gold, right? When I buy it, I'm buying it to hedge against dollar dropping, and assuming that the printing presses do kick in again, I will hold that. I don't plan to do transactions with it. So I think that that's the key, is where if we can get to a point where Bitcoin is a digital gold, I think governments will be okay with that, just like they're okay with gold. If it kind of starts moving back towards the transactional side, the reserve currency kind of thing, then you're right. There will be issues there. So I'm optimistic for Bitcoin because I think that you get BlackRock and Fidelity and these other bigger players to start to get involved. It makes it a lot harder with the lobbyists the lobbyists will be making sure that the government doesn't screw up their money makers. But like I said, always be prepared. I've been burned so many times on trades that at this stage, I almost go into every trade expecting that. And then, you play it safer because of that.
Last question.
No problem.
BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF, inevitable, yes or no?
Yes, inevitable. Absolutely. So again,
Good.
We even saw Gary Gensler testifying today. It's coming. The spot ETFs are coming. I mean, they've already got the futures and the futures ETF. So it's just one more step. And I think it'll help. And I don't think personally that you'd have all these big firms like a BlackRock filing if there was no chance at all. So I think maybe it gets delayed in October again, but I do think we do get a spot ETF at some point in the next 6 months.
I took a large position in some U.S. mining companies that BlackRock put their money into as well. After they got it
like Marathon Digital and like Riot Blockchain, or
TeraWulf too.
TeraWulf, yep,
smaller one, but they put about 5 million shares in there when it was coming down. After they got delayed.
No, I agree. I'm in that same camp. I saw the same things. I saw them with some big investments in some of these, and so I agree. I think those stocks will rise with Bitcoin and big money. I mean, again, there's this, like, the thing is, the same things I view in terms of eventually the money printing presses have to go on again, hopefully not for a while, but it's inevitable when you have this much debt. They're seeing the same things. They know the outcome. They know that there needs to be, I mean, it's one thing to be able to buy gold, but you want a digital asset that's quicker to exchange that can take on that role. And so they know it's coming, and they want to be in these miners because when price goes up, the miners are going to do very well.
Yeah. Do you think there would be a black swan event? Yes or no? That's what I wanted to ask you. With everything on.
Depending on the time frame. I mean, inevitably, yes, right? You know, just like COVID or anything else, there will be. I do think that the next events that this market experiences as a whole, and I'm talking stock market and economy overall, this is more to me like a slow train wreck, right? It's like we see what's going on and it's all slow motion, and there's just not a lot we can do to stop it, because it's almost like we've made our bed and the government's made the bed and the Fed's made the bed, and now we got to lie in it, right? You have to pay the piper at some point. And we're at a point where there's almost like no returning. There's a point of no return. And I think for me, yes, I mean, to be honest, hopefully we don't get the black swan, because if you combine that with what we're going through now, then it's just going to be even worse. But right now, I think it's more of a slow train wreck that we're just witnessing in front of us.
Well, if that did happen, God forbid, then that would be an amazing buying opportunity. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Just like, in all fairness, look at COVID, right? I mean, heck, gold flushed on COVID when initially and was a great buying opportunity. Bitcoin, everything, right? Panic always creates good opportunities. It's just, are you gutsy enough? Can you get control of your own fear to buy into it and get it at the lows?
Yeah, and you have to be liquid.
That's right. Liquidity is key. Always having a little cash on the sidelines just in case is smart.
Right. Yep. Well, Gareth, thank you so much, buddy, for doing this. I really appreciate it. I think this was great information you provided for our audience. Great discussion. And yeah, hopefully one day we could do this again in the future.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Take care, buddy.
Take care.